Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning for some of you out there. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining us today for our monthly legislative committee call. I think it's probably going to be a lighter attendance today based on the holiday. Hope everyone had a good holiday and safe holiday weekend over July 4th. I'm happy to get people caught up on some of the work that is going on from NIH's perspective, with respect to advocacy, some of the Hill work that's happening over the summer months here in Washington, D.C. So we'll get into it. Following the typical agenda here that you always see. Oh, I have that as a second slide. Before we even get to the agenda, I want to make sure people on the call are aware of our legislative conference, and we'll get back to this at the end of the call as well. But I wanted to make sure people are aware of the dates for our legislative conference coming up in Washington, D.C. At the end of in the middle of September. So September 19th, 20th, 21. We will be in DC. It's the Hilton DC Capitol Hill. And I think that may be a rebranded hotel, but it's the same hotel we've been using kind of right near our office, right off the Senate side of the hill. So it's a short walk up to the Senate buildings. So we will be there in September. This was supposed to have been our February event that we had to postpone due to COVID issues earlier this year. But we will be in DC. Look forward to having a lot of folks there joining us in Washington for the first time. We've had this event since I think beginning of 2020. So it'll be a long time coming to get folks back into DC and get you all in front of your members of Congress, get your members of Congress in front of the audience, all that. You can see some of the agenda items there. Our legislative committee call like today happens in person at these conferences. We'll do kind of an advocacy 101 update. Things have changed over the last couple of years, right? A lot of offices now taking more and more Zoom calls as well. Still not, taking as many in-person visits, but hopefully that actually helps with some of the outreach and getting folks in front of their members of Congress by using Zoom and the like. So some updates there on how to be an effective advocate. And then the general sessions on the main Tuesday. We usually do 2 general sessions that main on the Tuesday. I'm not sure yet if we're going to be able to go up to the Hill. Last I checked, they weren't allowing groups to host their events like we have on the Hill in past year. So we may be at the hotel most of that day, but we'll figure that out as we get a little bit closer. Hopefully they open things up even more. And then a Hill Day. We usually have a Hill Day on the Wednesday of that week. We're going to have a ton of handouts for everyone on site, bullet points, talking points, scripts for folks to use on specific issues, things like that. So we'll be sure to have everything ready for you who are attending. We'll try to make all of these documents available online as well, right? Because the advocacy doesn't just happen at the event or in DC, but anyone can reach out and call their members of Congress, and we'll try to make sure you have all that updated information that we're giving to people on site. We want to make sure people who can't make it to DC still have access to that same information. Registration should be open next week. It's possible it opens up today or tomorrow, but we'll be rolling it out through emails and bigger notices next week for sure. So be on the lookout for that. Look forward to having you in Washington, D.C. We'll revisit that. One thing I wanted to say, and let people introduce themselves in the chat box, but if there are specific speakers that you would like us to target, we have our normal list of targets, right? Department of HUD, or HUD, Department of the Interior, Secretary level, tribal program level, Census, Treasury, folks like that. We're probably going to be sending invites out to, I have sent some invites out already, but if there are specific targets or specific agencies that you would like to have us invite and make sure we're letting them promote their programs, or maybe doing Q&A with some certain programs, I'd encourage you all to put that in the chat box here on the side. We save all of these chats. This call is recorded as well. So we will be able to put this information to use. So if you have recommendations for who you'd like us to invite from the agency perspective on top of our normal targets, be sure to let us know, and we'll make those invites accordingly. With that, we can jump into the normal agenda. So welcome to everybody. Again, I would encourage you all to introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know what programs you're coming from, what parts of the country you're working in, et cetera. So we just see kind of what the diversity is on our call today. We love to hear all the issues going on in different parts of Indian country. We know there's different issues in different tribal areas. So happy to see where everyone's attending from today on the call. Typically, we go through kind of the housing bills in Congress, both the policy bills and then the funding efforts going on in Congress. Then we'll do an update on some administrative issues, whether it's grants, agency initiatives, and then some announcements at the end. But this is a very open call. I encourage everyone to do the hand raise through Zoom or just jump on and interrupt me if you've got a question or a comment. Always encouraging people to communicate with each other and answer each other's questions as well. It's a group effort here, so feel free to jump in with questions. Also encourage you to ask questions through the chat as well. I'll be monitoring that as we go. First item that we'll go through, if I can get the slides to work, it's just our NAHASA reauthorization. This is stuff that we've seen, each month to month. Not a lot's changed through June since we last discussed. But one of the efforts that we will be doing in the run-up to our legislative conference in September, I think we're going to try to do 2 to 3 campaigns launching before the conference. So when everyone arrives here, there hopefully have been a good amount of letters going to our folks on the Hill, to our advocates in Congress, telling them what our priorities are. So when everyone does convene in September, no one would be surprised kind of what folks are there talking about in September. One of those campaigns, of course, will be a NAHASA reauthorization, and probably combine that with just overall funding for NAHASA programs. We're in the middle of the FY23 appropriation cycle. As committees look at those funding levels, the budget that was proposed by President Biden, that was submitted to Congress earlier this year. So a lot of that work will be culminating around the September timeframe through continuing resolutions and then an omnibus spending package as well. So part of that is just reauthorizing NAHASA. Won't go into a lot of details here. I think you're all aware of what the bill does. You can see it on the screen there. We've talked about this bill quite a bit. Not a lot of movement. I know there's a lot of conversation going on between our champions on the Hill on the Senate Committee for Indian Affairs and their House counterparts at House Financial Services, talking about how to get a NAHASA bill passed or added to any type of kind of must-pass legislation. As we talked about, a lot of our tribal housing bills have to get added to other moving vehicles of legislation, like appropriations, like the NDAA bill, efforts like that. And those talks are ongoing. Some of the same issues that we've heard, the House priorities by the chairwoman of House Financial Services, talking about some of the Freedmen provisions that we'll talk about here in a second on the next slide. But overall, not a lot of updates on the NAHASA reauthorization right now, beyond the progress that we saw at the end of the year last year, getting it into the NDAA before it fell out at the last step. So again, the Senate version, probably our favorite bill out of all of these bills for NAHASA. We did get it added to the Senate NDAA last year, so hopefully that's good momentum and promise for getting it again into the Senate NDAA this year, and hopefully getting it across the finish line as we work with leadership in both the House and Senate. The House version of the bill, the Senate version has a lot of co-sponsors, bipartisan co-sponsors. The House version does not. It has the one sponsor, Chairwoman Waters. She did report that bill out of committee back in the fall of last year as well. So that bill is pending for the full House, but not a lot of support evidence through co-sponsors and the like. And certainly we have the concerns that you can see on the slide there. One, primarily setting the authorizations too low. We're constantly advocating for more funds for your tribal housing programs. This bill would actually set that number as a cap in statute at $680 million for the past year, and it would increase year to year. But you all are already getting more than $680 million, so we would hate to see a bill pass that would actually limit funding for any year beyond the growth that we would like to see. So that's the primary issue that we've got. There is still the language in there that would impact the tribes in Oklahoma that they're not supportive of at the moment. So always going to work with members of Congress when they're trying to adopt language that the tribes don't support themselves. It'd be very difficult for us as an organization to support anything like that without the tribes' support in the first instance. So that's the updates on NAHASA. So not a lot of updates there in the past month, but again, we'll be making some campaigns around this as we move towards our conference in September. This slide is just kind of a leftover as well. This is a NAHAZA reauthorization in a larger national housing bill, not likely to pass in its current form, but it speaks to our folks in Congress that they're still thinking and adding tribes to even larger housing bills and legislation. So that's always a good sign when tribes are included in that. And this particular policy bill would set a benchmark for appropriations at a much higher level, particularly in the first year, but also has the Section 8 voucher language that we've talked quite a bit about in the past. So outside of NAHAZA, I'll jump into some of the other housing bills that we've seen. Some updates here on the Native American Rural Homeownership Improvement Act, S2092, HR 6331. These are companion bills, so those are identical bills in both the Senate and the House. This is the bill that would expand the 502 relending pilot that we've been seeing out of South Dakota. And some great work there being done by Senator Smith and Rounds out of Minnesota, South Dakota. A ton of co-sponsors there. I think we've added one in the last month or two with Lujan out of New Mexico, and then some bipartisan co-sponsors in the House. I think we picked up 2 co-sponsors to that in the last month or two as well, with Sharice Davids and Ed Case out of Hawaii. This bill would provide $50 million of the USDA single-family loan program to Native CDFIs and the like to help promote USDA loans in tribal communities. We know there's been a big issue with USDA deploying those loans with just USDA staff involved in that process. So this whole program is meant to get that money closer to the communities through Native CDFIs. The updates on that, there was a webinar hosted by one of our partner organizations, Native CDFI Network. I don't know if any of them are on the call today, but that webinar happened, I think, the third week of June. I'll have to find a link for that, but if we get a link, we'll share that with everyone, either through the chat or through an email after this call. I don't want to get ahead of them. I think they're planning another webinar as well, so we'll announce that when they do, once they finalize it, but be on the lookout for another webinar again, because this bill would expand access to Native CDFIs for USDA funds. You know, they've been a critical partner, lead role on some of these advocacy efforts with our folks on the Hill, and they've been doing a couple webinars around this bill and effort. So really appreciate the partnership with that. And then the next step, and Joanna's on the call, I believe, and she's kind of been the lead wrangler for this issue, getting everyone on calls and you know, directing folks to who to contact, who to target for co-sponsors and the like. One of our next steps is also a template letter from you all, from our tribal housing programs, to send to your member of Congress or members of Congress to ask them to co-sponsor and support these efforts as well. So Joanna, you have any updates on top of that you want to provide about this bill? We're going to talk about the VA bill in a minute. Anything specific to this 502 bill?
Tony, thanks so much for sharing this with folks. I guess I just would encourage, if homeownership is important in your community, to encourage you guys when Tony sends out the letters, to ask your senator and your representative to co-sponsor the legislation, because we're hoping that the more co-sponsors there are, the more likely this legislation would be to be picked up, you know, either through you know, to get voted out of committee and put on unanimous consent in the Senate, or be incorporated into another kind of mini omnibus Indian housing bill. And the only other thing I would add is that the House appropriation, the House Ags Appropriation Committee did appropriate funds for this program. It was included, the appropriations was included in the president's budget. That was only I think 20 million was included there, and in the House Ag Appropriations, they included a set aside for this program as well. It was less, it was only 12 million, but that was still something we're really excited to see, that the appropriators are seeing value in the program.
Yeah. Well, and pending having a bill like S2092 or HR 6331 enacted, you know, the appropriations route is the primary route to continue these efforts, either at a local level or expanding it, you know, piecemeal as we go. So appreciate seeing that. Great to see it in the president's budget as well, and seeing the appropriators pick it up. So we'll continue working with folks on the Hill about that.
And I put the link to the Native CDFI Network webinar if folks want to learn more about the bill. And it was a great discussion between Round staff and Smith staff, and some Lakota Vogel, who was one of the Native CDFIs that worked on the pilot. She speaks on this webinar as well.
Okay. Thanks, Joanne.
Thanks, Tony.
So we'll jump ahead a little bit. Other tribal housing bills, HUD-VASH, we kind of had this bullet point for this particular Congress. It's really just been a part of the larger NAHASDA effort. The HUD-VASH bill had passed the Senate each of the last 2 years, or each 2 Congresses, and had not gone anywhere on the House side. So we've really been focusing on keeping it in NAHASDA, using that as additional leverage point on getting NAHASDA enacted, right? I mean, everyone wants to see this HUD-VASH program expanded to all the tribal communities. It's still limited now to only a few dozen tribal communities, but HUD-VASH is something we would like to see expanded and fully authorized. So that is included in all of our NAHASDA efforts as well. Not a big update on the Trust Land Homeownership Act, but this is a bill that did get reported out of committee back in May, I think, when we were joining each other in Seattle for our conference. So this bill is able for the full Senate to consider now as well. This bill is the bill that would provide deadlines for the Bureau of Indian Affairs to process their mortgage documents involving home ownership on tribal trust lands. And the deadlines are actually kind of mirror what's in their BIA handbook, but it will just give it an extra force of being enacted into law in the actual statute, and not just guidelines or guidebooks within the Bureau. But also it creates some positions to oversee that effort and make sure that it's working well or working better and improved over time. And that's kind of the key point of that bill, is to create more oversight and just watching that process play out. I think one of the things that we heard from that hearing were a number of senators concerned that they could pass this bill pretty easily, they thought, but they'd hate to be in the same position in a couple of years coming back having the same conversation. But this bill would create an additional layer of accountability at the Bureau of Indian Affairs to get some of their mortgage processing done. That really helps HUD 184 program and some of the other mortgage programs out there working in Indian country. The next bill is not quite a bill yet. It's in draft form. I know Joanna and some others have been working on improving the Veterans Affairs Native American Direct Loan Program. There was a GAO report that came out, I believe, last month. I didn't have time to put the link in here specifically, but you can see the GAO report number. You need to Google that. I think one of our other folks on the call may be able to put the link in the chat as well. But that GAO report found a number of issues with the program. And really just kind of the lack of progress that it's made over the years, and improving its outreach and improving its loan volume. There was only 180 loans issued by this program over about the last 9 or 10 years across all of Indian country and Alaska. So, it doesn't sound like a lot of loans for a national program, and I would say that it's not. There's, I think the numbers of Native American veterans it's a pretty big range, but I think it's a minimum to 35,000 up to 60 or 70,000 veterans, Native American veterans out there. So you would like to see more help and assistance going to those veterans in our tribal communities. So the bill itself would allow VA to expand this loan program to also include refinancing some loans. So loans that are already in existence, the veterans would be able to take advantage of better rates, better terms through this type of NADL loan. Grants to tribal organizations, Native CDFIs, maybe housing programs. I'm not sure. I don't know the specifics on that, but just for the outreach piece of that, a lot of folks may not know that this VA program specifically for Native Americans exists. And VA does not have a lot of full-time staff to work on this outreach effort. So the bill would create grants to let tribes on the ground do some of that outreach for the program. And then adopting some of the relending practices that we see working on the 502 area, putting that in addition to the VA Native American Direct Loan Program, letting them relend the Native CDFIs through that. So that bill is in a draft form. I think we're looking to see that be introduced in the next week or so. There is a hearing with the Senate VA committee that they might talk about this if it gets introduced in time, which I think is their goal. And I know they're doing some outreach with the VA department as well to get some feedback on the bill. So there may be changes in the future, but certainly like to see these efforts expand or improving these native programs at all the various agencies, not just HUD. But I'll turn it over to Joanne to see if there's any more to add about this one. It's a great effort here that's been in the works for a while now.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. The time sensitivity around this is because next week the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee does legislative hearings and once a month, and so the July hearing is on next Wednesday at July 13th. So Senator Rounds would like to introduce this in advance of that hearing, and so we're asking for anyone from Montana who has connections with Senator Tester's office to reach out just informally to any staff contacts that you may have, or even just calling the main line to ask to let them know that you support increasing access to home ownership for Native American veterans, and that you support him co-sponsoring the bill with Senator Rounds from South Dakota. And the reason why Chairman Tester, Mr. Senator Tester is so important is because he is the chair of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, and he's a huge advocate, as you guys know. But we just trying to close the deal with his office to get him as one of the original co-sponsors. And then the same situation with anyone from Washington who has connections with Senator Murray's office, Senator Patty Murray's office. And the other state is Senator,
Arizona?
Yeah, Sinema. Thank you, Tony. Senator Sinema, because those are both Democrats on the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. So if you're from Montana, please reach out to Senator Tester's office. If you're from Arizona, please reach out to Senator Sinema's office. And if you're from Washington State, please reach out to Senator Murray's office. And I have more information if anyone is from those states and would be willing to reach out. Just put your email address in the chat box and I'll send you a background email about that. And that's really time sensitive because they want to introduce it on Monday. So, so that it's on the records for the hearing on Wednesday. So got to act fast.
Great, thanks, Joanne. Garrett, you got your hand up. Jump in.
Oh, I was just wondering when that's happening next week, because Umatilla has a delegation out there next week, and they have a Wednesday meeting with Senator Murray's staff on kind of broader Northwest kind of stuff. But I'll put my email. I'll send you my email and maybe.
Awesome.
I could
Yeah,
tuck
and
that in
the
there.
hearing it's on Wednesday, July 13th, and it is, I'll tell you the exact time in case they're on the Hill. It's at 3 o'clock Eastern. And that's the Senate Veteran Affairs Committee. I don't think it's going to be that exciting to watch, but you can watch it online if you want to. If you're not in DC, you can watch it, but definitely if you've got folks in town, it'd be great to visit with your legislators about it.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Well, I'll pause here real quick. I think this kind of gets to the end of the policy type bills. So we usually divide up the legislative discussion between the HOSDA and other policy bills like these, and then the appropriation side. Any questions or comments now before we move on? Well, as always, feel free to jump in, interrupt me. Don't mind at all. But we'll move on to appropriations. This kind of shows the FY22. I think you're all very familiar with that by now. Passed way back in March. Was an increase for tribal housing programs across the board for IHBG formula and IHBG competitive. Some good plus ups there, but certainly not enough, right? And we talk about this kind of every call. We look at our tribal housing funds. Since NAHAZA was enacted, there's, I don't have the graph here on this slide deck, but there's a common graph where you have the single point in time where funds started back in 1998, FY98 for NAHAZA, and the funding level is pretty flat. And then if you factor in inflation, it's definitely a big cut year to year to the tune of, I want to say over 3 billion kind of revenue, or 3 billion funding lost over those 25 years or so. with NAHASA funds not keeping pace with inflation. So each year, you can't, your dollars aren't going as far as they were. And we know that's a big issue. The increases get us a little bit closer to where things should be back in 1998 terms, but certainly not even level with where the NAHASA fund should be at today had it just kept pace with inflation. I think the number is well over $1 billion for IHBG formula grant alone, and we're not there. We're only at $772 million. Another metric that I've been hearing a lot of is just the overall investment in tribal housing versus all of our nation's investment in housing and public housing. If you look at the overall budget of HUD year to year over the last 20 years, when NAHASA was first created, tribal housing was about a 2% investment out of the overall HUD budget, and it's gone all the way down to just a little over 1, I believe. I'll try to get those numbers prepared for next month's slide deck, just so people can see that. That'll be one of our bigger talking points as well as we go into the conference in September and some of the campaigns around NAHASA to reauthorize NAHASA and increase support or funding of NAHASA programs to keep it in line with kind of the deal that tribes struck back in the 90s at a minimum. Certainly, we want tribal housing has a lot of unmet need in excess of even getting us back to where NAHASA was back in the 90s. But we have the same metrics of, we know the number of housing units that are needed, and we're nowhere approaching those numbers year to year through acquisition or construction because of the underfunding of NAHASA program. So a big effort will be there as we kind of lead up into our next event in DC and just throughout this whole summer cycle of appropriations. As you know, FY23 funding is supposed to be finalized by September 30th. Very unlikely that's the case, and that'll lead into continuing resolutions and efforts to pass a final bill for the year in the months after that. So we just want to be mindful and keep reminding our folks on the Hill that despite the gains that tribal housing made through some of the COVID packages and to FY22 appropriations, there's a long way to go to make tribes even close to receiving what is needed for our housing needs in the Indian country. So some work there around that effort as well. The FY23 budget that the president submitted back in March really did just keep those gains for FY22. I think if you look at the overall HUD budget for between FY22 and 23, there was a large increase in the request, but there was no larger increase for tribal housing specifically. So again, just any effort that we're going to be investing or reinvesting more into housing for the country, for the nation, we want to make sure tribes are part of that and seeing their share, their equitable share of any increases in investment in public housing, which we didn't quite see in this budget beyond the gains that were made in the prior year. And then had some line in there about the USDA. I think Joanna mentioned that number was lower on the House appropriation side, but I'll update that and we'll keep up those efforts as well to keep that funding in any final appropriations for the year. Here's a slide again, just of all the funds that tribes were able to receive over the COVID years. Some supplemental IHBG, supplemental Indian Community Development Block Grant funds as well, and then the Treasury funds, which we'll talk a little bit about here in a few minutes. So I guess, so I'll stop there. I'll pause right there for a second. Is there any comments or questions about funding, appropriation cycles? The next few slides are talking about more of the grants themselves from the agency perspective, talk about the Treasury program. So I'll stop here about, see if there's any questions or comments about appropriations or funding levels. Part of the packet that folks will get as we develop the packet for the legislative conference, certainly be the budget recommendations, and that kind of goes through all the various housing programs that tribal housing programs can utilize, whether it's NAHASA funds, ICDBG 502, HIP at BIA. We have a budget recommendation sheet for all of those programs. We'll update that and make sure it's updated. Needs constant updating with, unfortunately, with the inflation factors that we see over this past year. If you keep adding in those indexing numbers kind of month to month, that number keeps growing. Unfortunately, as I know many of you know, your construction dollars just aren't able to go as far as they have in the past, with a lot of extra costs for construction, transportation, and the like. So we will do what we can to update those documents. I see a note in the chat there about updating the website as well, and I know that's a constant effort that we can always get better at posting updated versions of information. I think some of them are still from the prior Congress, some of the bills that we list there. So we are in an effort to update that as well moving forward. And we'll definitely put these one pages and things that make them more accessible to folks. With that, we'll go into the grants. These are FY21 grants. So, the FY21 should have been over a ways back. We're almost at the tail end of FY22, but all the FY21 grants are out the door now. The awards were made back in just in May. So that's kind of why they're still on the slide deck for FY21. And then one thing to note there is just the ICDBG, the awards didn't match the appropriation. We were told by HUD that all of the applications they received that were fundable or qualified for funding were funded, and there just weren't the volume of applications there. We all know that's because of all the other programs and funding you all are working with, right? That may not have been quite the demand for this particular ICDBG cycle, and you're still working with all the COVID funds and other funds that you've received over the last couple of years. There was the FY21 Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program. I'm not sure if anyone wanted to raise their hand or chime in the comment section to see if they applied for that. This is a new program, but there was kind of a rural set aside, I believe, for this program, and tribes were actually eligible under this program as well. And I know that's not a common thing for some of our HUD grants outside of ONAP grants, but tribes were eligible. The deadline was last month. Happy to hear if anyone applied, and we'll be monitoring the award cycle for that moving forward. But that was a new grant program that HUD was prioritizing or promoting in the last few months. Tribal HUD Bash, there was a NOFA to expand that at the beginning of the year. I believe they're going to revisit that because they didn't get, a lot of applications for that to be expanded to other tribes. Again, I'm sure it's just a matter of all the funding streams that you had to have received under COVID and have to keep up with reporting wise. Tribes just may not have prioritized applying for the HUD Bash NOFA that was out at the beginning of the year. I did want to make folks aware, I saw a press release from HUD with a new pot of money for the Continuum of Care program, and I think it had a particular set aside for rural communities. But because expanded tribal eligibility the last couple of years, I want to make folks aware. I didn't see the actual Federal Register notice yet. I'll try to find that and see what the deadlines are, and we'll post that out in our newsletters and social media as necessary. But I want to make folks aware that I think there is a bigger pot of money out there for the COC program. So if you've been active in that program or would like to try to get into it, there may be an opportunity here to do that. I know, and we'll try to share more information about that as we find it. With that, we'll go into, this is a slide that's kind of a leftover from last month, but there was some deadlines around this. This is all for American Rescue Plan funding. So all tribes received IHBG supplemental allocations under the ARP, American Rescue Plan, $450 million for all of Indian Country Formula Fund. Not every tribe accepted those funds, and funds that were left over, HUD had the statutory authority to take that funding and apply it back to the ICDBG ARP award cycle. We knew that award cycle was oversubscribed. There was more than 40 million in unfunded applications. So leftover funds from the IHBG pot that tribes may not have accepted, HUD may be reclaiming or reallocating back to the ICDBG ARP program. There was a deadline of July 5th for tribes to submit their claims for that IHBG ARP money. And so we'll hopefully be seeing some news or updates from HUD about timelines on that of when they may be awarding ICDBG ARP funds. I do know the numbers went down, and by down I mean more tribes did claim their allocations since this slide was created back a month ago. So I don't think it's not 30 million worth anymore. I think the number is lower. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think more tribes did claim their IHBG ARP allocations to do that, to take that funds. I will see, there's a question in the chat about FY22 appropriations, ICDBG. ICBG is an annual appropriations. I believe it's at 70 million these past couple of years, and it is included in FY22 as well. Those NOFAs should, yeah, there were no FY22 NOFAs on the list because none of the NOFAs are out yet. We know HUD is in the process of getting those through their internal processes to be announced, but there should be soon, sometime, I don't soon as in the next few months, FY22 ICDBG and IHBG competitive, I believe, for FY22 funds. But they're not on the list because those NOFAs just haven't even been published yet. Jump ahead, slides to go. Another HUD activity, the Tribal Intergovernmental Advisory Council. This had an original deadline of May 31. HUD was hoping to get enough applications to fill an advisory council of 2 members from each ONAP region and 3 at-large members for a full advisory council. They have extended that deadline. It was published, I believe, last week, republished to extend the deadline to now through July 28th. In particular, the Southwest region, I believe, was highlighted as not having enough applications. I know we've talked to some folks from the region. We've worked with our NHC board members to get the word out to folks in the Southwest, but it is open to everyone again. So if you missed the first deadline, if you or someone in your program or an elected leader at your tribe is interested in setting on the HUD Tribal Intergovernmental Advisory Council, there is still time to apply or be nominated by the end of this month. And they are still hopeful to set the full council by the end of the fiscal year, which is by September 30th. Is still their goal from when we talked to HUD. So just want to let folks know that that is been extended. If you weren't able to submit a nomination by May 31, it's been extended to July 28th for that advisory council at HUD. And again, we'll keep pushing HUD to, even if there are vacancies for whatever reason, to set the council and get them established. We know that was an issue back when they tried this probably 5 or 6 years ago. They had to resolicit for nominations, or they didn't get enough nominations, so they didn't actually formally establish the council. And here we are 5 or 6 years later going through that exercise again. So hopefully we definitely see folks fill those seats on this advisory council at HUD. I think the next couple slides will be Treasury programs. I know there's still a lot of questions about this, some probably confusion out there. I don't know that I got a lot of updated answers right now, unfortunately, but we'll go through some of these questions. If anyone has heard more from Treasury in the intervening weeks, feel free to chime in. Right now, the deadline for most tribes to spend their emergency rental assistance money is September 30th, just in a few months. Tribal reallocations may still occur after the July 15th reporting deadline. So tribal ERAP programs have quarterly reporting requirements. That quarter ended on June 30th. Sorry if folks can hear a dog outside. That reporting deadline is July 15th, so coming up at the end of next week. And then Treasury will use some of that data to look at reallocations of tribal ERAP money, which is allowed under the ERAP program under the statute. Some tribes have already been receiving reallocations from non-tribal sources, so the state and local programs that had ERA funds that were voluntarily giving that back. Some tribes have been able to benefit from that. For those tribes who do receive reallocations, they actually have an additional 3 months to spend that money. So through almost to the end of the year, the September 30th deadline does not apply for those tribes who do receive a reallocation. You can see some of the data there at the bottom. The national program through April spent 70% of its money. The tribal program through March has spent almost half of its money, but it's a lot of funds left on the table. We expect those numbers to jump up in this second quarter of 2022 here, so April, May, and June. But I don't think that'll get up to 100%, right? So there's going to be some funds there for folks to look at to see how we can spend that money. I know there's some open questions. I'll jump to the next slide. Here, there was a webinar that Treasury had put out that we helped at NHC put out word for. We had a lot of attendance for that webinar. I believe the webinar portion is, or the presentation portion is on our YouTube page if you go there. The biggest questions there were paying prospective utilities and rent. I know some of the answers we have for that right now are not what we wanted to hear. And I think we're still working with Treasury to be able to extend some of those timeframes moving forward, or at least, really clarify. If folks have had anything in writing that they had received from Treasury about being able to spend money on substantive rent and utility payments for these last 3 months of this year, so October, November, December. If you could forward that to me, that'd be great. This open question of can tribes spend their ERA funds on those 3 months when the deadline is September 30th. We know there was authority to approve prospective rent and utility payments. A lot of the writing that I've seen was probably purposely vague about these 3 months here. So if you were to approve a 3-month rent and utility in September for the next 3 months, is that allowable? The answer we've seen from Treasury is no. The substantive payments have to be invoiced or obligated for the month September and before. But if folks on the call have heard anything different from Treasury, let us know. Let me know outside of the call too, or you can chime in here. And then there was always some questions too about reallocations away, how that's going to be calculated, and which tribes get reallocations to them. So we're still trying to get some more guidance on that. I will say one of the efforts that we're going to work with in the run up to this conference in September in Washington is just working with our folks on the Hill just to extend the overall deadline for tribes for ERA1. So there was an ERA1 and an ERA2. Many of you know tribes were not part of ERA2 because they moved that money over to IHBG. But with the deadlines for ERA1, tribes are effectively the only organizations, housing programs that won't have ERA funds past September 30th deadline. So we're going to work with folks on the Hill just to extend that, but certainly no guarantee for that. We'll take an act of Congress to extend that moving forward. So certainly encourage all of you to keep up with your ERA programs, spend the funds on families and individuals that need it as much as you can. But we're going to try to continue efforts to extend this program because states have a lot more funds under ERA2 to continue their rental programs even after this end of this fiscal year. So on an equity level, we're taking funds away from tribes when states will continue to have funds for rental assistance, emergency rental assistance. So that'll be something we could push for in the coming months as well, in addition to the work working with Treasury to do what they can to extend those timeframes kind of administratively moving forward. So I'll stop right there because that's kind of the last discussion on rental assistance. Are there any new updates that folks have heard as you guys talk and work with Treasury? I know a lot of you have been submitting questions to Treasury yourselves, and I try to, when I see questions, I'll forward those along. So hopefully you're getting some responses. Anyone have anything to add about emergency rental assistance? Okay. Well, feel free to put things in the chat if you like. I'll try to get to the next few slides. We've got a couple more slides here to get to before the top of the hour. The HAF, Homeowner Assistance Fund, just got word earlier today or yesterday, over 130 tribal applications or HAF plans have been approved. So hopefully your programs have received, those have been approved, have received funds. If you haven't been approved, hopefully you've at least heard something or are in communication with Treasury folks. I know they've been getting better and better as this year's kind of caught up to them, where they've been catching up throughout this year. But having over 130 tribal HAF plans approved is a good number compared to where we were. But I don't know the full volume of HAF plans that have been approved. I know there were a number of tribes who still have not submitted HAF plans, and I want to encourage everyone to do so if you want to take advantage of this HAF funding. We did host a few trainings. I believe those are on the YouTube page. I'll double check again. We do also have limited TNTA offerings from NAIC perspective. So you would ask NAIC directly for training in TA regarding either the rental assistance or HAF program. You can do that through this online submission form. The link that you see on the screen will take you to our main Tribal Housing Assistance Resource Hub. And from there, you'll also see a link specific to requesting TNTA from us at NAIC to get some TNTA over these Treasury programs. So happy to help. I know Treasury as well has been interested in helping get more training out there as well, particularly on reporting and compliance issues. As people get closer to these deadlines, we want to make sure your programs, following all the latest rules and guidelines that's out there. So if you need training in TA for any of that regarding ERA or HF, just let us know. I did see a note in the chat, someone excited that their plan finally been approved, and that's great to hear. I think we're every tribe that gets approved, we're celebrating at this point because they had taken so long to get this program up and running. Over these months, the plan approvals have trickled in. So great to see more and more tribes getting their funds for HAL. Next few slides here, I just want to give a few updates. NCAI did host its mid-year conference just this past month in June since our last call, and held up in Anchorage, Alaska. I wanted to thank folks at Cook Inlet. We were there, that got a tour of some of the Cook Inlet housing projects, beautiful projects that they've worked on over the years, and some that are just in the works and going to be coming online in the next few months or years. A lot of great work going on up there. I was really happy to be able to tour some of that. There was a housing panel specifically as part of NCI's agenda, had some great panelists there. I got to moderate this discussion with Sammy Joe, Carol Gore, Elizabeth Elia, Northern Circle, all of them doing great work. Big takeaway from that is just everyone struggling with keeping up with the resources, right? There's all these resources that are available, all very limited. So you're piecing all these projects together as has happened in the past. So that was kind of the big takeaway, but a lot of great work, had a lot of good pictures of homes that have been built over these last 10, 20 years under NAHAZA, and it's amazing what tribes are able to do when they're able to put these projects together. So got a great audience, had some tribal youth involved in that audience as well. I think probably saw some nodding heads from some of the youth. They keep them busy at NCAI, but was very happy to see some of them come in and participate in our housing discussion there. One resolution that was passed at NCAI, and you can search that. I didn't have time to put the link here either, unfortunately. Resolution ANC 22044. There was a case out of Alaska that creates a lot of uncertainty for when tribal duties to inspect homes end. A lot of these responsibilities are usually under contract. This particular case dealt with the mutual help home. Those have agreements, those have contractual obligations by the home buyer or the tenant, plus the tribe. That had expired, and there was an incident where we needed to find, or the court wanted to find liability to help help hold someone liable for the injuries that resulted. But here the state Supreme Court of Alaska held that a tribal housing program was liable for tort damages for an injury that was sustained after an MHA agreement had ended. The time frame for that contract had expired. A lot of kind of nuanced facts about hadn't been conveyed yet. I know not all tribes are doing mutual help homes at this point still, but it was just an interesting case, and it just creates a lot of uncertainty, right? This tribe was held liable for not inspecting some equipment in the home when they didn't have a contractual obligation to do so, but the court found that there was still a duty under tort laws and principles that the tribe had to carry it out. So a resolution at the NCAI mid-year conference was in response to this case, urging Congress, urging the state of Alaska, urging HUD to look at this case, analyze it, respond to it in ways that just clarify what tribal responsibilities are in these scenarios where there are equipment in the home that need to be maintained, and it was unclear in this case whose responsibility that was. And here this case doesn't help answer that question moving forward for a lot of tribes, because a lot of folks may think your obligations end, but this case was an example where a court could find that you still have duties to serve your tenants in some of these cases. So I don't want to overstate it in the sense that this was a specific program, mutual help, and some specific facts that was past the agreement life. House hadn't been conveyed, but certainly a lot of uncertainty out there. So I want to make folks aware of it. I'm sure we'll be hearing more about this case in the next few months. This case was just decided by the Alaska Supreme Court in May. So this was in response to that. I don't think I have a slide here for it, but I also want to make folks aware of the Supreme Court decision out of the United States Supreme Court just last week. there was a case involving criminal jurisdiction and who has jurisdiction over crimes committed by non-Indians against Indians in Indian country or tribal communities. I think for most people in most states, the idea was that crimes on tribal lands involving an Indian would probably involve the federal law enforcement, federal jurisdiction, and not state jurisdiction. Here, the Supreme Court, and a pretty big change, said the states also have concurrent jurisdiction with the federal law enforcement. So it came out of Oklahoma, where a lot of the state of Oklahoma is Indian country. So I just want to make folks aware of this. I don't have a slide over it. I know there's a number of webinars happening this month by NCAI, by some groups out of Oklahoma, just trying to analyze the case and what it means for Indian country and crime prevention, law enforcement moving forward. But it's a pretty big change in what people's expectations were for these types of crimes. So I just want to let folks know if there's other attorneys on the call want to correct any way I characterized it, feel free to jump in. I know it just came out I think last Monday or Tuesday. So a lot of people still analyzing the case and trying to find options on how to move forward beyond this. But just want to make folks aware, obviously, a lot of your housing units may be impacted by some of these issues moving forward, where you have families of non-Indians and Indians living together, and jurisdictional issues that kind of come out of that. So just want to make folks aware of that. The last slide here is just the announcement of our legislative conference again, which I showed at the beginning. So look forward to talking about all these topics upcoming in September when we're all together in Washington. But I'll stop here. I'll open it up for questions, comments, and yeah, hopefully people got a lot of information out of the discussion today, but happy to answer any questions or comments you guys have. I can stay a little bit later. I see CC from NCAI did put their webinar. It's coming up in about 5 minutes for a webinar on that Supreme Court case coming up at 2 p.m. Eastern. If you want to jump to that, the link is there in the chat as well. But I'll open it up one last time. Any comments or questions out there?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. And thanks for the shout out about the housing panel. I was sick and I missed it, but I heard really great things and I'm still getting really great feedback. So thank you so much for moderating that. And the Castro Huerta webinar that we're hosting, it does start pretty soon. It's open to everybody, so feel free to join. But it's not the only one we're going to have. So I think we're going to have a series the next few weeks. So if you can't join it, we'll definitely have some follow-up materials that people can access, and then other webinars coming up that people can join. But yeah, thanks.
Thanks, CC. Glad to hear you're feeling better. Sorry you had to go all the way up to the conference in Alaska and got under the weather there and missed the chunk of it, but glad to hear you're doing better. Well, thanks for joining us, everyone. Appreciate you taking time this afternoon or morning. Look forward to talking to you again next month, but don't hesitate to reach out if you've got questions or comments. You can always reach out to me or anyone on the staff at NIHC. Between now and then, no reason to wait. And we'll try to answer whatever questions you have. But until then, we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us today.